This is Selah with Farm to Market Miniatures. Thank you for joining my miniature hydrangeas tutorial. This is part 2 where you'll begin making your miniature hydrangeas. And in this video we'll be preparing our stems, flower centers, and then we'll do some punching at the end. In part 1 we discussed our materials list, so if you missed that video I'd highly recommend that you return to it, part 1, so that you'll be familiar with what you will need on hand for this tutorial. The list is located directly under this video on my blog at farmtomarketminiatures.com. If you're watching from YouTube, look for the link to my blog under this video. Okay, so let's get started. The first thing that I'd like to discuss with you is the scale of this project. Although there are many different scales of miniatures, what we'll be using is the popular 1-inch scale, which is also referred to as the 1/12 scale. What this means is that every 1 inch is equivalent to 12 inches. So let's take this drying rack that I made, inspired by Joanne Swanson, for instance. This drying rack is approximately 3 inches tall. So in reality, this drying rack at a 12-inch scale would be 3 feet tall, 36 inches. So that is how you would reduce a 36-inch item down to a miniature 1/12 scale would be 3 inches. Okay, so the actual size of hydrangea flower heads averages about 6 inches. I'm sorry I don't have an actual one in front of me, but I do have some of the miniature ones that I've made. And so the measurement between on a regular sized hydrangea head is about 6 inches from one side to the other. So when you're making our little flower heads, you want your flower head to actually be a 1/2 inch from one side to the other. So that's what we're going to be doing, and when we do get to the part where we will be making the little balls inside the head, that will determine actually how large your flower head's going to be. So you kind of want to stick to the same size of little balls when we get to that, and I'll go into a little bit more detail once we get to that part. So I know you're anxious about getting started. I am too. And the first thing that we're going to do is actually paint our wire. If you purchase the white wire, like I had suggested, then you just need to take one piece of your white wire, which is average about 18 inches, and we're going to paint that with some folk art paint that I mentioned in our materials list. Just going to get a few drops of this paint here, and if you want, you can take your paintbrush or your sponge brush and you can actually lay this down and paint it. But I found a little bit quicker and messier way to do it, and I'm just going to do that. And by the way, this is just a little piece of butcher paper that I took, and it has a little bit of a waxy side, so it makes a really nice palette. Alright, so I'm going to just take a little bit of that paint on my finger, and I'm just going to run this wire right through my finger that has paint on it, and we're going to paint this wire right up. Doesn't it look fun? Just like school where we got to finger paint. Here we are again. Okay, you see how quick that was? I have the entire thing painted. So I'm going to lay this aside and let it dry. It will only take about 3 to 5 minutes to dry, and then we're going to cut the wire so that we can have the wire to make our little flowers today. Okay, through the magic of video, we're back. My wire is now dry, and I want to show you what you want to do once your wire's dry. We're just going to cut this into 2.5 inch segments. I have one here that I already have cut, and I am just going to cut that wire. Now I did recommend that you have a wire cutter, and I just cut that with my scissors, so I'm going to grab my wire cutter real quick so that I can actually use what I suggest. But because this wire is only 32 gauge, it really will cut with a regular pair of scissors if that's all you have. Okay. I don't know if you can see or not, but I wasn't just really perfect when I painted this wire. And that's okay, because we are going to be covering this wire up with floral tape, and that will cover the majority of this wire. So hopefully none of that white will show through, and really I don't think it will. But the green is only there as a safety factor in case when you're wrapping your tape on your wire that doesn't quite cover it. But again, in nature, nothing is perfect. You'll hear me saying that over and over again in this video. And so it's okay that these have a little bit of white showing. And so don't you worry about that. And again, these aren't all perfect in the same size, but that's okay too, because actually these are a little bit longer than I normally would make. And I actually make my flower and then I cut the excess off at the very end. So approximately 2.5, 3 inches, you know, anywhere from 2 to 3 inches, that would work just fine. For our next segment, we're going to pull out our paper clay or your air dry clay that you have chosen to use for this project. Okay, so this paper clay and the little green wires that we have are what we're going to use. I'm going to get my paper clay that I already have in a little baggie. I pulled some out not too long ago, and I just stuck it in a baggie so it won't dry out. Paper clay will dry out pretty quickly, so you want to keep your baggie close by. And whatever amount that you're not using, then you want to put it back into your baggie and close it up so that it won't dry out. If your paper clay does become a little crunchy or feels like it's too dry, don't hesitate to take a little bit of water in a spritzer and spritz it and mix that in, because it will reconstitute your clay, and you just want to work it like you would Play-Doh. Okay, so this piece is ready to go, and we're going to start making some little balls. And I have some here as an example, and here's the little purple one that I've shown before, and these were some that I made earlier. They are a little bit larger. I made them a little bit larger in thinking that it would actually shrink down, because paper clay does have a little bit of a shrinkage factor. They didn't shrink as much as I thought, so I'm going to make my next balls a little bit smaller, because this is the size ball that I really actually want. And so all you have to do is just take a little pinch, and I'm going to tell you exactly, I believe, let me grab this little scale here. This little ball is around, let's see, I wanted to show you in millimeters, and that would be about 5.5 to 6 millimeters, somewhere in between there. So if you have a millimeter ruler on the other side of your regular ruler, the little millimeters are the little tiny lines on this ruler. So you'll make it about 5 to 6 millimeters. There we go. That works a little bit. I'm going to make 2 or 3 of these so that we'll have some to work off of in our tutorial, but feel free to make as many as you like. I've made a lot of hydrangeas, and I've made a lot of these little balls and stems and had them ready for when I was ready to start putting the petals on. It's really nice to have it done ahead of time. You just want to roll the ball in your finger. Doesn't have to be perfect. It's not going to actually show. It just is the base of your hydrangea that we will be putting our little pretty paper petals onto. And you know, again, in nature, it's not the same size. They vary in size. So if your balls vary a little bit, that's perfectly fine. So there are some balls that I have ready. These are going to be the center of the flower. And so what you want to do is you want to take your Eileen's quick dry glue that I had recommended that you purchase. I'll grab my little palette over here, and I'm going to pour out some glue. Doesn't take much, and it does dry quick, so you don't want to put a whole lot out on your palette. You just want what you need. I'm going to dip one of the ends of my stem into that glue, and I'm just going to insert it into this ball that I just made. about halfway. You don't want to go all the way through, and you just kind of remake your ball there on the end and just lay it aside. So we want to do that with the rest of our little balls that we have made. You want to dip your glue. What the glue is for is just to secure that ball on the end of this, of the end of the stem. If you have a little glue poking out right there, just leave it. It's good for just keeping that there and adding a little bit of extra security for you. One more to go. Okay, so there you have it. Let's see that a little bit better. I've got paint all over me, and you will too. So what you want to do is you want to just put these off to the side, take them outside in the sunshine. They'll dry in a couple of hours. Realistically, paper clay dries overnight usually, especially this small of an item. I wouldn't recommend you putting it in an oven. I would just say let it dry naturally. And also, I think I had mentioned before, it's your choice to use air dry clay or not. Some people would prefer polymer clay, but it's a little bit more expensive, and you also have to bake it in the oven. So I just really wouldn't take that extra step myself, especially for a part of the flower that's really not going to show. Anyway, so lay these aside, and we will get ready to start punching. Okay, we're ready to start punching. So I brought out my Martha Stewart Hydrangea punch and the paper that I've chosen to use for my hydrangeas. I cover papers in part 1, so if you would like to know more about what papers to use, what I recommend, I highly recommend you watch part 1. This particular paper is a light lavender, and that's the color that I'm going to be doing the hydrangeas for this tutorial. You can choose whatever color you like. You don't have to do the light lavender like I'm doing. It's just what I've chosen. All right, so the first thing I do is turn my punch over to the other side. That way the punches will actually be up here on top. And the reason why I do that is because I want to slide my paper in. It has a little slot to slide your paper in, and you'll see it come through. And if I did my paper like this, you would see that I would get a punch that would be half of that larger flower, and I just really don't need that. Don't need any of that flower. So I'm going to line my punch up in my paper so that it just goes right along the edge, and I'm going to punch, and you'll see I have 2 full flowers, and I did not get any punch on that larger flower. I just tip it over and allow those to go onto my work surface, and I move down the edge, and I just continue to punch just those 2 flowers. I turn my paper and I go along the edge. And you just kind of get a feel for where you are, and you just keep on going. I like to do it this way because I don't want to waste too much paper. I know this paper didn't cost that much, but it's better for our landfills. Want to be mindful of waste and just use as much as I possibly can. Okay, so I've gotten to this part. And as you can see, I have a lovely little piece of paper here with a bunch of punches around the edges. And it makes it so much easier when you have a straight edge to punch on. So what I'm going to do is take my scissors and just cut that edge off. You can save that edge and put it in your scrapbooking materials and use it later. Put it on a collage it into a painting, whatever you want, or toss it however you want to do it. But you do have some lovely little strips there now. And then I return to my paper edges, my straight edges, and I punch again. So I'm not going to bore you with all my punching. You get the picture, and I just continue to do that until I just basically use up my entire piece of paper. This particular paper started out at 3 by 3, and it was a really nice size. So if you do end up getting a larger sheet of paper, you may want to cut it down a little bit and work with it at a smaller size. It really makes it easy to work with. Okay, so let's work with our leaf now. Our leaf punch from Punch Bunch. I want to talk to you about these little tiny punches. They are sometimes a little bit difficult for punching, and actually I have some punches that are teeny tiny, and so they make it even harder. So you just have to work at it a little bit, and you'll see that I may struggle a little bit when I'm punching. It's only because it's awkward in my hand. And if I was just holding it down here on the base, it would be a little bit easier and not as awkward, but I like to watch where I am. Again, I don't want to waste any paper. If I'm like this, I can't tell really where I am. I like to work where it's upside down so that you can see where you're punching. Up, and it just popped right out of there. And I'm just going to work my way down. Again, this paper started out as cardstock, which I find very hard to punch. And so I split it in half. I took the back half of this page off, and then I painted the back side a green, a similar green as the front. And so it's still stiff, which you kind of want a stiffer one for your leaves. They get handled a little bit more, and so that is the reason why I wanted to use the cardstock in the first place for the leaves. Okay, I'm not going to continue on with that, but you can see what I've done. Now, what we will be doing is we'll be shaping and forming these petals and these leaves in our next segment, and getting them ready to glue onto our little bases after they are dried and painted. So until that time, I hope that you have fun getting everything ready, and move on to our next video where we'll be going over shaping and forming. Thank you.